All right, good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, good afternoon.
All right, I will need a moment to start the presentation. All right, we'll give folks another minute. My name is Joe Anastasi. I am the program manager for member services. I'm the one that sends out the emails about Zoom links and stuff like that. Looking forward to this presentation, this noon hour on risk analysis using Barbecana. We're gonna make sure. I think we got the majority of folks here. John, I see you're here. Thanks in advance for giving this presentation to us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and nice to meet you. We haven't met yet. So I am covering for Mayor today. So, all right, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to give special thanks to our sponsors, Apex, who help financially sponsor the chapter and provide some services and additional advice and counsel. And they're definitely an organization that has job opportunities too. So if you're looking for a position or a change of careers, they'd be a great organization to get a hold of. So thank you, Apex, for being a great sponsor. John, I think I'm going to leave most of the intro to you, but John here as the CEO of this company, we're going to get a preview of its capabilities here, and we'll have time at the end of the presentation for any questions. If you wouldn't mind, I am going to monitor the chat, so while John's talking, he doesn't have to monitor it. And at certain points in time, we can break in. And John, are you okay with questions
Absolutely.
along the way, or do you want them
Yes.
at the end?
Oh, absolutely. Questions along the way is fine. And thank you for monitoring the chat.
Yes, that's great. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. So I'm going to give you a second to set up your share, and then I'll stop sharing. Oh, and I should probably give you, oh, good. You have access.
So hopefully you see my 2 dice on my desktop.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to start with a PowerPoint presentation. It won't be too long and hopefully not too boring, and then actually look at using the software itself. I'm going to take probably 45 minutes. And as was mentioned, please put your questions in the chat and we'll discuss them as they come up. And then we'll have some time at the end if you have further questions as well. So a quick introduction to schedule risk analysis. First, let me introduce myself and the company. My name is John Owen. I've been in project management since 1982 when I joined an offshore engineering company in the UK as their project controls computer manager back in the days of minis and mainframes. I worked for Wellcome from 1986 through to 2006 when they were acquired by Deltek. I was the Vice President of Development for Wellcome, so responsible for the development of products like OpenPlan and Cobra and Welcome Home and so on. I stayed with Deltek through 2014 in their product management group, and then I joined Tony Welsh, who was the original creator of both OpenPlan and Cobra, at his new company called Barbecana. Barbecana is named after the Barbican, which is an area of the city of London, most notably with a Roman gate, which was the old access point to the city of London, which is the financial district in London, and that's where the Barbecana comes from. And we first sold our products, Full Monty and Schedule Inspector, in 2012. I joined Tony, as I said, in 2014, and I acquired the company in 2019. So now it's all my fault if something doesn't work. So what problem are we trying to solve? Well, it's an unfortunate truth that many projects are delivered later than expected and cost more than was originally anticipated. It's easy to blame poor estimating and or execution for these failures, but in reality, estimating is generally pretty good, and execution indeed is excellent as well. So the major anticipated reason for these delays is actually change of scope. So people change the scope of the project, and that you know, has a big effect on some work may need to be redone, additional work may need to be performed in the future, and obviously that changes the expected finish date and cost. But there is what we call an unexpected cause, and that's simply the fact that estimates are single point estimates. So we estimate something will take 10 days. And the question is that a realistic approach to estimating? If I asked you how long or if you ask me how long my drive to work used to be when we used to go into offices, on average, it would take me 30 minutes. So you might say it's a 30-minute drive to the office. And on an average, that would be the truth. However, I live in Houston, Texas. If, you know, the schools are out, I'm fortunate with all the traffic lights, the weather is good, I might be able to do it in 20 minutes. I can't do it any quicker than 20 minutes because of the limitations of the speed limits on the roads and my vehicle, my driving skills, etc. However, as I mentioned, I live in Houston, and when it rains in Houston, it goes to hell. So the traffic lights stop working because of power failures. People start to run into one another because the roads are very slick with weeks and weeks of hot weather and the rubber on the roads, and it can take me an hour to get into work. So that's a great example of a skewed distribution, and the fact that a 30-minute estimate, while on average truthful, is not necessarily a reliable indicator of what will happen the very next day. So we're better off capturing a range, and I'm sure you've all heard of the concept of a 3-point estimate, where we capture a best case, worst case, and most likely duration for how long things will, in practice, possibly take. The other thing that's important about uncertainty is, as with my drive to work, when bad things happen, they tend to have a bigger impact on the outcome compared to when all good things happen. So all good things might be a relatively small improvement in the time it takes to do something, but when bad things happen, in practice, they tend to have a bigger impact, and it can take significantly longer than originally estimated. That leads us to the concept of skewed distributions, and there's an example of what we call a beta distribution, a beta curve, which has been skewed. So the most likely is my average drive to work, and the worst case is the 60 minutes over to the right. And why does that matter? Well, let's assume that our estimates are excellent and execution will be in line with the estimate. So if on average we plan to take 5 days to do something, if we plan to take 5 days to do something. On average, it will indeed take 5 days. If we do it 10 times, the average will be 5 days. Now look at the top two tasks here, which are in series with a finish to start relationship between them. In practice, as I said, everything has some uncertainty. So let's say task A slips to 6 days. It actually takes 6 days to perform that first task. Well, you know, we're good project managers. We'll be tracking status, might be using earned value. We'll detect the slippage. Or we may just get lucky and task B happens to only take 4 days anyway. So we can either redouble our efforts on task B and do it in 4 days, or we just get lucky and it's finished in 4 days. In any event, the finish milestone there still occurs on the 10th day. So the uncertainty kind of evened out in that particular example that I gave you. Now let's look at the bottom two tasks, which are in parallel. Again, let's assume task A happens to take 6 days, and it's going to push out its successor to start on day 6 rather than day 5. So there's nothing that task B can do to improve that situation. If task B finishes in 4 days, it does not improve the situation. In fact, the only thing task B could do is make it worse if it took 7 days to complete. So if you tabulate that very simple example, and we're making some big assumptions here that the durations are the same, the uncertainty is the same, they're just as likely to finish early, a little bit early as a little bit late, so symmetrical uncertainty. If you tabulate that, there's actually only a 25% chance of that successor milestone starting on time, 75% chance that it will be delayed. So that's kind of horrific, just assuming symmetrical uncertainty. So we're not saying bad things are going to happen. We're just saying there's going to be a little bit of uncertainty around that duration. And this issue is called merge bias. So wherever some task or milestone has more than one predecessor, so there's multiple paths leading to it, the chance of that successor starting on time will be less than 50%. And that's the biggest unexpected reason that projects get delivered late. So that's one of the things that we're going to be modeling in the software. So considering uncertainty, there's actually two types. Estimate uncertainty, which we've just been talking about. We don't know exactly how long something's going to take in the future. We have a good guess, and our averages may be good, but we don't know for sure exactly how long a particular task will take in the future. And then there's threats and opportunities, sometimes called risks. These are random events. They may or may not occur. If they do occur, they will have some kind of impact on the project. It might purely simply be quality, cost, or it might be indeed be schedule. The effect of uncertainty, some of them are obvious, the variations in the project completion date and cost. Those are the expected effects of uncertainty, but there will be changes to the critical path, or almost certainly there will be changes to the critical path due to uncertainty. That's an unexpected outcome of uncertainty. Suddenly things that you were monitoring closely because they were on the critical path are no longer the critical drivers to your deliverables. And that's unexpected, and that causes management churn, increased management effort, and it can also lead stakeholders to have a reduced perception of the value of the project as well. So projects with a lot of uncertainty are more likely to be cancelled in the future. So what we're trying to do here is not just model when projects might finish and how much they might cost, but also try and improve confidence in our ability to execute and therefore reduce management effort and cost. So we can model the threats and opportunities, those risks, the random events that may or may not happen. I personally recommend that you focus on the uncertainty, estimate uncertainty side of risk management, certainly when you're starting out using a risk management tool. I absolutely encourage that you should have a risk register, that you identify all the threats and opportunities that may affect your project. It's a best practice. It's required by many contracts. And not everything in the risk register will impact the schedule. There may be, as I said earlier, threats to quality, cost, and so on might not necessarily result in schedule delays. If they are likely to result in schedule delays, then I would encourage you to use your risk register to plan some kind of response. Can you mitigate the threat? Can you avoid the threat? Can you transfer it to somebody else? So find ways of moving a schedule threat. If you really need to model those threats in the schedule, and you can look forward to a more complicated management discussion because the simulation results are more difficult to interpret. They're not wrong. They're just more difficult to convince people of what they're seeing. So there's an example of what we call a bimodal or multimodal histogram on the screen there. The first major peak of the histogram is the likely range of finish dates should everything go well. And then the second smaller peak is caused by there is a risk being modeled in the schedule that has a 20% chance of occurring, and if it does, we have to do additional work. And you get that two-peak histogram. People will say, well, what does that mean? When are we going to finish? When are we most likely to finish? The good news is there's an S-curve overlaid over the histogram, and we can see highlighted in red there, we have an 80% chance of finishing in this example in July the 20th, 2020. So you can still read off your level of confidence of finishing by a particular date by looking at the cumulative histogram. But unfortunately, a lot of management tend to look at the histogram itself rather than the S-curve, and they find it confusing. So just be aware of those multimodal reports causing a greater discussion time, but focus effort on the S-curve. The other thing we're looking at here, I mentioned the 80% chance of that on that particular chance of the July the 20th. So why 80%? Why not 100% confidence of being able to deliver on a particular date? Well, it all depends on the project that you're executing. If the project is absolutely time critical, then yes, you will be considering forecasting your dates at 100% confidence. And by that, I mean that 100% of the simulations that we execute suggested the project could be completed by a particular date. But it has to be a mission critical project. It might be building the stadium for the Olympics. If you don't have that ready on day one of the Olympics, the reputational cost would be enormous and probably put your construction company out of business. If you're NASA and you're sending a probe to Pluto, you only have a couple of weeks every couple of years where everything's in the right place in the sky for them to send a probe to Pluto. And if you miss that, the cost is enormous to then store that satellite for the 2 years to wait for the next opportunity to launch it. So, very high value, high risk projects, you might forecast it at 100%, but most commercial projects and the federal government typically, for example, requires their projects to be forecast at 80% confidence. So 80% of the simulations show that we can finish on or before the date that's in the contract. The balance, and it comes down to your management, how they want to weigh this, but it's an opportunity cost. If you're forecasting at 100%, you cannot commit your resources or your company to do any other work until the worst case scenario finish predicted by the software. You have to have your resources available to be able to be 100% sure that you can reach that 100% date. And that means you can't fill your order book. You can't be bidding for new contracts before that worst case scenario. So most people go for an 80%, somewhere between 80 and 90% chance of being able to deliver by a particular date. And that's weighed against the contract penalty clauses. So can we take on the new business and hopefully make more profit for new business versus the penalty clause should we fail to deliver by the date that we promised at 80% confidence. When to perform an SRA. A lot of people talk about running an SRA as part of proposal. In fact, many proposals require an SRA to have been performed. I strongly encourage you to consider running the SRA every status update cycle as well. With our software, that's very painless. You don't need to re-enter a bunch of information. We'll automatically factor uncertainty on existing tasks as they are progressed. So if it's 50% complete, then the uncertainty will effectively be reduced by 50% complete on the assumption that we've done half the work. So at least some of the uncertainty's gone away. Obviously, if having done some of the work, you find that the original estimates were incorrect, or everything's much more rusted than you thought, so it's going to take longer, then you can update the scenario, but you don't have to if everything is going roughly to plan. How does it work? We use a technique called Monte Carlo simulation. So basically, we simulate the execution of your project thousands and thousands of times. The more times, the better. I always encourage people to run as many simulations as you are prepared to wait for. The reason for that is for each task that has uncertainty, we are sampling a duration from within the distribution that you specify between the worst case, most likely, best case, and using the template, the distribution type that you specify, be it triangular or normal or whatever. And we're effectively plugging in a random duration for each of the tasks in each simulation, and then we effectively aggregate the results to give you those histograms and cumulative S-curves at the end of the day. And the more simulations to run, the more chance of every possible combination of best case, worst case duration being sampled for all the tasks in the project. Some people will say, well, why don't you just calculate it? Well, yes, sure enough, we could calculate the absolute worst case by just doing the traditional CPM calculation with all the duration set to the worst case and then all the duration set to the best case, and we'd get the absolute range, but we wouldn't have any idea of what our 80% confidence was. So hence having to run the simulations. Probability distribution curves. A lot of people worry about this. And I was talking to a guy from Tekaloti, the guy who does the software for the DCMA yesterday, and he said it's quite interesting how much people worry about which distribution type to use when they're modeling uncertainty in their plans, because ultimately the distribution type doesn't make the most difference. The big thing to concentrate on is getting a reliable estimate of your best case, worst case durations. The choice of distribution type is about the third most important factor in terms of the reliability of the results you get out of the tool. To that end, the vast majority of our customers use a triangular distribution. A lot of federal contracts, if they specify about the SRA, will mandate using a triangular distribution. It's not the most realistic. The beta is far more realistic in terms of what will potentially happen. And you can see the triangular on the left, the beta in the middle, the normal on the right. I don't suggest its use at all. It's not a very realistic prediction of what will actually happen in practice. So the beta is the most realistic. If you look at any sample of real things, it would tend to look like a beta distribution, samples of people's height, population sizes, all that kind of stuff. And indeed, the time it takes to execute projects tends to look like a beta distribution. The reason people use a triangular distribution, there are two reasons. It's been used for years and years because early computers could only do a triangular distribution. And so some of the older techniques in the industry, that was what it was. The other reason is, and it's kind of cute, because the standard deviation of a triangular distribution is bigger than, for example, the beta distribution. By that, I mean, we are more likely to get samples closer to the extremes of the best case and the worst case. You actually build in a slightly greater contingency for risk in a kind of sneaky way without anybody ever realizing you're doing it, because you're actually saying in the model, it's more likely that samples will be taken closer to the worst case and the best case compared to actual real life, which looks more like the beta distribution. And then the typical results we get out of the system, the histogram, the S-curve we already talked about. The histogram itself is not particularly useful information. Everybody expects to see one, but it doesn't mean much unless you're trying to have it run a sweepstake as to the most likely date that the project will actually finish. But the cumulative S-curve overlaid over the histogram, that's the key takeaway from the histogram. So there we can see our cumulative probability of finishing by a particular date. From the perspective of the scheduler, the person working on the schedule and striving to arrive at a schedule that will meet the contract requirements, the top right there shows a tornado sensitivity chart, and this is your friend. This will show you the tasks that are creating the most uncertainty in your outcome. It will show you opportunities for schedule compression if you're not achieving the confidence that you need on a particular contract date. Then the tornado chart will help you identify where you can start to look to improve the situation. Ultimately, you may need to go back to the estimators and revise estimates, get them to say, okay, this task is showing up as very critical and very sensitive. So whatever we're delivering is heavily dependent upon this particular component, and it's creating a lot of uncertainty. Can we re-estimate it? Can we use a different estimating technique to try and firm up what the actual durations are, and if necessary, can we reduce the duration, use more or better resources, or change the logical path to avoid that task being on the critical path to the required delivery. The bottom right is what we call a risk path chart, and it's simply showing based on the simulations the most likely primary, secondary, tertiary critical paths through to the selected deliverable, be it project completion or some kind of interim milestone that's important to you. I do encourage schedule margin. I've been talking about schedule margin for 15, 20 years now. And fortunately now it is becoming a well-accepted technique. It's promoted by the PMI, major agencies use it and have definitions for it. The bottom line is schedule margin, and I hate to use the word buffer because that makes people think of critical chain. It's got nothing to do with critical chain, but it's a buffer or schedule contingency, schedule reserve that you put into the schedule to show people your contingency for risk. So it highlights, this is when we think the work is going to complete, and that then it leads into when you're promised the customer that you will deliver. So there's going to be a buffer in there to absorb the effect of the uncertainty that's occurring in the schedule. And the SRA is one of the best ways of actually sizing that buffer. Just said that. And we at the end of the day, as well as the histograms and the tornado charts, we get what's called a risk-adjusted Gantt. So this is an example from Microsoft Project. We've pushed the information back from full Monty, so we're showing the start and finish dates at 80% confidence, and then we're using those to drive the yellow, brown, purple, and green bars against the red and blue bars, which are the original schedule from Microsoft Project. Having run an SRA, you will get this new set of bars. They are for information only. They are something you will share with your management, with your customers. You do not share them with the people executing the work. You still execute against the underlying schedule in your scheduling tool exactly as you have always done. Otherwise, if you tell people, well, really, we're promising to the customer that, you know, it may move out here, then the people executing the work tend to think, well, okay, I don't need to start it quite so soon. And then, of course, you lose your buffer against the uncertainty that happens every day in the workplace. So risk-adjusted Gantt, it's great piece of information for management and customers, but do keep it away from the people actually doing the work because of Parkinson's law or the student's law. The biggest challenge with implementing an SRA process is the people who are going to use that information. They basically have to understand that information is only useful if it's actionable and they take action. So if the tool says there's 0% chance of meeting the project's goals, then something must change. I was talking to a gentleman from the DoD yesterday, and he said, yes, we require an SRA in our contracts. And a lot of times that when we look at the probability of success, it is 0. And currently we do very little about it. We don't push back on the contractors and say, hang on, you're telling me we've got 0 chance of meeting the dates in the contract. And that we still give them money. So it is an organizational perception change that you do need to take place in your management to use the information and make a difference. However, one pharmaceutical customer Their management honestly was not convinced of the value of an SRA, but fortunately we had a champion there, and he convinced them to try our software for a year on half their projects. And to be honest with you, it didn't really make a lot of difference to the reliability of the forecast that they were working. So projects still came in roughly compared to where they were expected, but they on average were saving $600,000 per project, and they were running a lot of projects. It was something like 200 live projects at any one time, and they were saving $600,000 on the project. So they were saving a lot of money on the projects that had run the SRA. And people were saying, why? What's happened here? And they looked at the accounting, and it was travel costs, because the SRA was giving them a better prediction of what might happen in the future. They were more prepared for it, and they didn't suddenly need to have executives getting on expensive business class flights to wherever they were sourcing their production or their research from. And so they were saving a lot of money in travel costs. And so they ultimately decided to implement SRAs on all of their projects, primarily because of the money that we're saving rather than the improved delivery. So it's not necessarily about the finish dates, but if there's something that must change, you may have to renegotiate the delivery dates, re-estimate tasks with greatest influence on the outcome from the sensitivity, reduce the durations, more or better resources, or as I said, change the logic so that you have more things going on in parallel, which gives you a little bit more ability to do things earlier. So what I'd like to do now is I'll just pop up my email there. It's jon@barbecana.com. Are there any questions at this stage? Otherwise, I'm going to flip over and just show you the real product.
Hi, John. No questions in the chat.
Okay,
So
cool.
thank you.
So we do have a bunch of information on our website. Briefly show you that. So here's barbecana.com. Under Full Monty, you'll find how to and other documents. So there are documents on interpreting the sensitivity analysis in NG, generally interpreting the results, along with some videos of actually doing things to try and make it easier for people to get started with the tool. But anyway, as promised, here is the tool. So I'm using Microsoft Project. We support Microsoft Project or Primavera P6. I'm using, it's actually Project 2019, but we support anything from 2010 through 2021, and P6 16.2 through to 21.12. Opening our little demonstration project here. It's just designed to fit on the screen, so I don't have to scroll, which is, what can be a bit laggy with Zooms and so on. Three major components: a hardware component, a software component. I've got some integration testing, and then we've got a little bit of marketing activities going down here to produce a brochure for whatever it is that we are making. Microsoft Project is clearly showing a critical path going through the project initiation, hardware design, part A, hardware integration, down through testing, through to the delivery. You'll notice here I've got some schedule margin tasks, the gray task, schedule margin 6 days. So I've got 6 days of buffer protecting the contract delivery, which has been promised on 8/14, against where we are anticipating finishing the work on 8/4. So I've got six days of schedule margin there. You don't have to have schedule margin to use the tool, absolutely not, but I do encourage it. It's a best practice, regardless of whether you run an SRA. Full Monty sits as an add-in inside Project, so it's right there and quickly accessible. I clicked on the dice icon there. It's opened the product. It's showing me all the tasks in the schedule. Currently, there's no information because we haven't run a risk analysis. I have my system set, and every system can be set differently. I've got mine set to apply a triangular distribution of plus or minus 25% on all the tasks. That's a lot of uncertainty. It's more than you would normally see as what I would call background uncertainty, but that's because I do a lot of testing, and I also work on a lot of customer projects to identify, you know, why they're getting results that they were not expecting, and exaggerating the uncertainty helps me do that. Out of the box, it's plus or minus 10%. So it is plus or minus. We're saying on average, all of the tasks are expected to finish in their estimated duration. So we're saying hardware design 20 days. On an average, it will finish in 20 days. It might be as little as 15, as much as 25. And I can see those actual values specified there. So I'm just going to run a risk analysis, going to run 10,000 simulations. Again, run as many as you're prepared to wait for. And when you're about to produce your final management report, add a couple more zeros and go to lunch or go home to sleep, because absolutely the more simulations that you run, the better. So that ran 10,000 simulations. It executed project 10,000 times, substituting in different sample durations for each of the tasks based on the range that we specified with the distribution type. So if I go and look at the graph for the work complete, so this is the traditional finish, ignoring the schedule margin, Full Monty is saying we have a 41% chance of delivering on 8.4. A lot of people are surprised by that. They think, well, if each task has an average chance of finishing on its estimated duration, then surely the project should. But because of that merge bias, there are actually 3 merge points in this project where the hardware and the software come together, where the brochure comes into the final thing, and then the testing. They all have multiple paths leading into them. So that is why it's less than 50%. And this is actually a good result. A lot of customers, when they first run this, they see 0% at this point, and we get a lot of support calls about that, saying the software must be broken. It says I have no chance of finishing on time, but based on the information that you put into the model, and if it's got a lot of work going on in parallel, that is a reasonable result. It's an expected result, and that's where the schedule margin comes in, because remember we had 6 days of buffer protecting the contract deliverable. And if I move forward to the histogram for that, we can see we have a 94% chance based on the simulations of being able to deliver by 8/14, which was the contract promised date. So we're getting those 2 dates. We've got the 41% of the work complete being finished on 8/4 as projected by Microsoft Project, but we have a 94% of being able to deliver to the contract finish date that we also had modeled in the schedule and protected by the schedule margin. On the right hand side, you get the percentage probability of finishing by a particular date. You can change the format of this. I'm calling them P80, P70. So that's what a lot of customers tend to call them, but you can call it 80%, 70%, whatever you want. I've highlighted the 80% just because that's very typical for our customers to use 80% confidence. So we actually have an 80% chance of finishing on 8/10, which is nice. It's before the 8/14 that we've promised to the customer, and you always get some goodwill with the customer if you deliver earlier than you promised to. So we have a pretty good chance of delivering early on that. Obviously, that plus or minus 25% is not realistic in a real world scenario. So how can we improve that? Well, there's several different ways. I'm just going to save that information. You'll see it's now populated back into Microsoft Project, the start and finish at 80%. You could choose whatever percentage that your management or customers as required that you use, and I'm actually using that to drive the different colored bars underneath the red and the blue over here. Basically, the darker the color of the bar, the more likely it is to be on the critical path through to the deliverable. Anyway, so how can we improve our estimating model? Well, the simplest way is to use what we call templates and go through and do an assessment of your confidence in the duration estimates that you've been given. A lot of our customers use six templates. So they have high, medium, and low for engineering work, and high, medium, and low for new product development and computer software. The reason for that is engineering work tends to be well estimated and likely to occur in the range. So if an engineer on engineering work tells you that something is high risk, they might mean, you know, plus or minus 5%. But if a software engineer tells you something is high risk, you know you're talking plus or minus well, not minus, you're talking plus 100% over whatever estimate they gave you. So that's what typical customers do. They have 6 bands, but you can have as many as you like or as few as you like. Here, I'm just using 2, low risk and high risk, and they're using the same, based on the same criteria. So my low risk is going to be a smaller amount of uncertainty compared to the high risk task. The choice of the wording is up to you. You could call it high certainty, low certainty, or high uncertainty, whatever you want to call it. I'm using low risk, high risk. So how do we get that information into Full Monty? Let's go back into Full Monty, and I just select all the tasks here. I just hit Control A like you would in Word or Excel, apply template from text field, and I'm going to choose the text 20, which has that high risk, low risk assessment in it. Tells me it's going to update some tasks, and now the tasks that are in the darker text have been highlighted. So my low risk has come out as 90% best case, 100% most likely, 115 as the worst case, and the high risk 95% is the lowest it's likely to get, and we're saying 110% for the most likely. So basically what we're saying is historically, these people have always underestimated. So for the purpose of the model, we're going to add on 10% to the estimate as the most likely, and then 150% or whatever they gave us as the worst case. And then we can rerun the risk analysis, go and look at our work complete. Previously, it was 41%, I think. Now it's dropped down to a 3% chance of being able to deliver by 8/4, as shown by the original schedule. And then we look at the contract complete, the contract delivery date. Unfortunately, that has now dropped to 66%. And if the contract required us to be 80% confidence of being able to deliver by 8/14, then we have work to do. So what work can we do? And that's where, as I mentioned earlier, the Tornado schedule with index is the scheduler's friend, because this will identify the tasks in the schedule that are creating most uncertainty in the outcome. To this end, one important criteria for the Tornado chart is tasks will only appear on the Tornado chart if they were ever on the critical path to your selected deliverable, be it project complete or an interim milestone. If they were ever on the critical path, so at least one of the simulations, they must have been on the critical path to that deliverable, and they have some uncertainty. And to that end, that's why I recommend all tasks should have some uncertainty, even though it's very minimal, plus or minus 1%. Would be fine, because then they have the possibility of showing on the Tornado chart. And the reason I want everything to show on the Tornado chart, if it's ever on the critical path, is because this acts as a checklist. Are these the things that I expected to be critical to program? Is there anything missing? You know, for instance, if I didn't see the hardware tasks, is the logic broken? Why were they never, ever on the critical path to the outcome? And it might be right. It could potentially be that the durations on these tasks are so small that they are never going to be on the critical path. But it's a good validation. And likewise, for instance, if the brochure popped up on here, I'd say something wrong with my logic. Why is the brochure potentially delaying the deliverable? And go in and look at that. So the Tornado chart, the scheduler's friend, good validation. The green and the red bars over here, the green tells me that when this task, software design, finished closer to its most optimistic duration, then the project on average finished earlier. So the average finish for the project overall, the average finish date for the project was actually the 11th of August. When this task finished early, then the project average moved forward to the 10th of August, not the earliest it finished, but the earliest that the average finished moved earlier. Likewise, when this task finished at its worst case, then on average, the project finished around the 21st of August. And what that tells me is the tasks that have green are opportunities for schedule compression. If I can reduce the uncertainty, reduce the duration, change the logic of these tasks, it will likely have a beneficial effect on the ultimate finish date for the program. So given that we only have a 66% chance of finishing on the contract date, these are the places I would go look. Looking down here at the hardware integration, for example, it's only got red. And that means that the only time this influenced the outcome, it tended to push the finish on average further out. And you might say, well, why is that? It actually had uncertainty, which allowed it to finish earlier than the things that were high risk. And the reason for that is it was only on the critical path 20% of the time. So most of the time, the critical path was going through these higher risk items and they were pushing out the finish. So the only time hardware integration, indeed hardware design, etc., were on the critical path was in the cases during the simulation where everything else happened to finish early. Okay, so everything else must have finished really early for these to pop onto the critical path. And then the chances are that they would be sampled closer to their worst case duration during those relatively few times that they were included on the critical path. So honestly, yes, there's probably some green in there, but we can't see it because of the scaling. But they are not great opportunities for schedule compression. The tasks with the larger chunks of green are places that I could look to go and improve the situation. So by reducing the duration of software design and software integration, I can probably relatively simply improve my chance of delivering on time. We can prove that. I'm just going to save that, so I don't have to re-enter anything. I'm going to go into software design. I'm going to change it to 17 days. Software integration, change it to 17 days. Just rerun the analysis. That information has been loaded in, rerun the analysis, and look at the I now have an 85% chance of delivering on the contract delivery date. So by highlighting those tasks as the best opportunities, yes, I've made changes. Now, of course, whether you be allowed to adjust those durations, you have to go back to the team and say, what can we do to reduce the durations of these tasks? You can't just do it arbitrarily. It must be in agreement with the team. If we actually look at the tornado chart, we'll see that things have changed. We've got things like testing and initiation. They actually have quite a bit of opportunity for bringing in the finish of the project. Primarily, we're still looking at software integration, software design. So even though we reduce the durations of those, they're still the heavy hitters in terms of creating uncertainty. So it might be worth re-estimating them and say, can we reduce the uncertainty rather than just using this broad brush 95, 110, 150? Can we put in some realistic numbers? And let me show you how you do that. So for those known high risk items, we have gone to the trouble of saying, well, for those, what distribution type do you want to use, sticking with triangular? But then I'm actually putting in these values for best case, worst case, 1725, 1726, and so on. So how do we load that information into Full Monty? If I go File, Import the information, it's loaded that data into the model, and then I can again rerun the simulation. So we can see what that's done, and that's actually again improved the matter. We now have a 92% chance of delivering by 814. P80 is now at 811. When we very first started, it was 810. Now it's at 811. So it's moved a little bit. So that's the basic process of how you get information into the SRA. It doesn't have to be onerous. You can capture a lot of information. In fact, well, you can capture all the information in Microsoft Project or Primavera P6 itself. You don't need to put it into into our tool. The data is all stored here. All of our results can be populated back into the source scheduling system, so you can include that information in your standard reports from your standard scheduling tool. So that's what we're about, and that's why an SRA is useful. It will help you produce a much more realistic forecast of when things will actually happen in the future by taking into account the uncertainty in the duration estimates that you have. So that's my canned piece. Do you have any questions that you would things you would like to see?
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but if anybody wants to drop a question in the chat, that'd be great. or put your hand up.
How has the audio quality been? I'm using a new headset.
I think it's been great. I could hear you very clearly.
Cool.
And I love your accent. Gives you.
My Texan accent. I've lived there since 2003. A lot of people think I'm Australian these days, but I was originally from England.
Yeah, lots of compliments in the chat. We did have a question. Is there a book of how-to of where to click to make things happen?
There's a user guide and a getting started guide. The getting started guide is actually available from the documentation here. So the getting started walks you through the kind of process that I went through to load the uncertainty information into the model and look at the results. The user guide, much more factual, if you like, and boring, tells you what, you know, if you press this button, this is what happens. The more useful probably is our website and the how-to documents. They're kind of documents that were created based on questions that have been submitted to our help desk. So, you know, we update the documentation if that would have helped. But if it just needs a more in-depth explanation, that's probably too much for the user guide and so on. We do put it on the how-to and other documents on the website, and the videos on there. I'm sorry, they're of me. They're ghastly. I don't like listening to them, but again, they walk you through the process. So if you just want a refresher on what we've been doing, take a look at the videos. You can get a 14-day free trial from our website. The Microsoft project version actually continues working forever, but after 14 days, it limits itself to only working on projects with 100 tasks or less. We have a lot of universities that use it in their project management classes because of that. So they can get it for free. And 100 tasks is perfect for just trying out the concepts of an SRA in a classroom environment. And so, yeah, you can do that. And you can purchase it through our website as well. There are government discounts, there are volume discounts, and there are quite a few companies that have site or corporate agreements. So we've got a list of those on the website. So if you happen to work for one of those, you can get it from your IT for free.
We have two more questions from Jerry. Can the schedule uncertainty be translated into budget uncertainty, assuming a resource loaded schedule? And if so, how do the results compare to EVM analysis?
Okay, very, very different to EVM, because EVM, you know, the budget cost of work schedule and so on. So our results will be basically the budget cost of work schedule, but nothing else. So no budget cost of work performed and so on. But under graphs here, I can go and look at the overall cost histogram. So as you said, this only works if it is resource loaded and you have rates for your resource. You can yeah, you can get out the profile of the likely final cost of the project based on the uncertainty in the model. Cost uncertainty is actually so much easier to do, and there are quite a few tools that do it. You know, At Risk, Oracle, Crystal Ball, but the difficulty with those kind of tools is they typically don't take into account the schedule delays that potentially will occur. And obviously a scheduled delay is likely to have an impact on final cost, rates may change and so on. So by doing our cost analysis based on the resources assigned to the task, we do take into account rate changes over time and things like that. So yes, it can do that. We also do the JCL plot, the joint confidence level plot, which shows you, in this case, a 40% chance here of meeting a cost target of 88,000 versus a finish date of 89. You can change these targets because I haven't specified are just the mean finish from the cost and the schedule. But there's some people like to look at this and see, you know, what's the probability of meeting both cost and schedule targets.
Great. I don't see any more questions in the chat, but one question I was asked earlier, John, not to put you on the spot, so we could talk to you offline. Folks wanted to know if the presentation that you gave, the PowerPoint, is that available? We can convert it to a PDF and email it out if you're okay with that.
Absolutely. I'm happy for you to, you said you're recording, you can share the recording, and I will send you the PowerPoint so you can share that as you see fit. No problem with that.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. So for those of you attending, you'll get the presentation, the link to the recording, and the PDUs. So I'm going to, because we only have a couple minutes left, going to wrap up here on some chapter business stuff. But John, thank you very, very much. It was very informative. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. Great to talk to you.
Okay. So, and if folks on the line here, if you have PDUs that you want to report for one of your credentials, you may do so. This is the information. This will also be in an email to you probably sometime this weekend. It's one PDU for ways of working. The PMI has changed the names of the talent triangle dimensions, but they're essentially the same. So technical is now ways of working, and then now we have business acumen. If you have any questions on why they changed or what they changed, we have a link on the homepage of our chapter website about it. So I'll give this 2 more seconds so you could take a picture or just wait for my email this weekend. Okay. Please continue to visit our chapter website. We send out emails, of course, and we're on social media. We are always looking for new content and new topics to present. So if you have an interesting project or technology you want to show off, presenters earn PDUs, but also it's a good way to get your name out and get some visibility for you and your organization. So we're always looking for programs. We're always looking for new ideas. Visit our website for our upcoming events. We got some really cool stuff coming up. We're going to have a presentation from the Canton Football Hall of Fame. We have International Project Management Day in November. We're going to have a really good speaker. So lots of really good opportunities to get some PDUs, meet other people, and learn. How do you keep up with your PDUs? In addition to chapter events, projectmanagement.com has webinars. There's a couple of really good PMI podcasts. Velociteach has a really good podcast. These links will be made available to you this weekend too. But a good way to round out your education and learn more about project management and the world around us, and get PDUs if you need them. Thank you. Let me check the chat to see if there's any last questions. Looks like we are good. Thanks everyone for participating and joining our meeting today. Again, John, thank you for a very informative presentation, a really impressive tool. All right, everyone, have a wonderful day. Try to enjoy your summer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.